Hi everyone, my name is Rosanna and I've worked within the field of addiction for several years as an addictions counselor. The people I encounter are unable to give up their addiction. They put their substance ahead of everything else and as a result lose everything else. They often destroy their lives. They destroy everything one by one. Their life savings, their homes, their jobs, their health. They lose their human relationships, including their own families, their wives, their partners, their children. They lose their morality, their freedom due to incarceration because of legal charges to support their using. And often they lose their lives. Many overdose and being near the brink of death only go back using shortly thereafter. Loved ones become desperate, asking, why are they acting this way? Don't they care about us anymore? The truth is, there is a part of them that doesn't care about them, only caring about getting their next fix. It's like tunnel vision, right now, and achieving the high or the trance. The person struggling with addiction often asks the same questions long before anyone else does, asking themselves, why do I act this way? What am I doing? Don't I care? Don't I care about my family, my kids, and myself? Many families realize it's the addict part, the addiction, that they hate and fear, not the person. It's often a great relief for people suffering from an addiction to realize they are not bad people as they believed. It's not all of them, but it's only a part of them that has gotten out of control and has developed as a result of something else, and now has grown into a psychological and a physical dependency that has become unmanageable. So, what causes people to do this? What would cause people to give up their children, their rent money, their dignity for the next higher drink? What's really going on? Today I'm going to use an analogy of an iceberg to explain this complex, powerful, baffling, often misunderstood condition we have come to know as addiction. Addiction, as you probably know, has been described as a global crisis affecting millions and is potentially one of the most stigmatized and misunderstood conditions there is. Often misunderstood and associated with someone of moral weakness and flawed character, which only induces shame and actually increases the likelihood of one's hiding one's problematic behavior and preventing them from seeking help. No one chooses addiction. And for those suffering with an addiction, quitting may be extremely difficult on their own, and they need help doing so from people who understand. So, back to the iceberg analogy. People only see the tip of the iceberg, the primary addiction or substance, whether it's alcohol or cocaine or heroin, etc. However, what people don't see is what lies below the surface. In doing so, the trouble is once they get a handle on their primary addictions, many people, instead of venturing below the surface, skitter across the top of the iceberg in search of new ways to mood alter. They may simply trade cocaine for alcohol or crack cocaine for gambling, and they don't get any better, not really addressing the underlying root that is fueling their addiction. So we're going to delve a little deeper and take a closer look at what's happening below the surface. First, I think it's necessary that we define addiction. It's derived from Latin meaning to be bound to, a giving over to, or to be enslaved by. To me, that's a pretty accurate description, as I have worked closely with people for years with substance use dependency and seen people ruin their lives in the merciless pursuit of their substance. Generally in the field, it's seen as a compulsion, a repeated and continued use of a substance despite its negative consequences. It usually implies a strong psychological hold and a physical dependence. Let's first focus on the psychological dependence, and then we're going to move over to the physical dependence as a way to describe how one becomes so tunnel visioned and mentally preoccupied on the substance, making it a priority over everything else in their lives. In order to understand the face of addiction, it is really necessary to tell the human story, as well as the neuroscientific story. Yes, addiction is a choice to a degree, but human nature has a funny way of working sometimes, filling in the gaps when there are unmet needs. And now their choice is controlled by a deep, learning, associations, and strong emotions. They are self-medicating, which means that people who've experienced often neglect or trauma or PTSD or other psychological nastiness in their early childhood or adolescence come out depressed, and they often come out anxious. One way or another, they're not feeling good. They're not feeling happy. They're not feeling whole or feeling complete. And so they try stuff, and that something makes them feel better. And therefore, they begin self-medicating. Gabor Mate, a physician and leading expert in childhood development, trauma, and addiction, would say, to understand addiction, we don't focus on what's wrong with it, but what's right about it. In other words, what is the person getting from the addiction? What are they getting that otherwise they don't have? What are their underlying emotional needs that have not been met? You see, substances become chemical soothers that relieve them from pain. They provide a sense of control, a sense of peace, a sense of calmness, though it's temporary. And then Gabor asked the question, well, why are these qualities missing from their lives in the first place? What happened to them? All substances, alcohol, meth, cocaine, opiates, they're all painkillers. So the real question he asks is not why the addiction, but why the pain? Addiction has been described by many as needing of something outside of themselves to make them feel happy and whole. This in turn is problematic as it results in one forming an unhealthy attachment to a substance to provide them with relief and comfort. So a seeking of something outside of themselves, an externalized substance becomes a strategy to self-medicate. Substances of abuse are responsive. They are consistent and they're predictable. Unfortunately, substances of abuse are only temporary and they come with devastating consequences. Follow me. The individual uses a particular substance to manage and control their moods and mental states that they cannot otherwise cope with on their own. It happens like this. We have a desire to feel better, and we discover that a certain substance leads to that satisfaction. Alcohol and drugs are common mood managers. They are reliable. We learn how many drinks or which drugs work to achieve the result we want. We prescribe our own dose, so to speak. We self-medicate. Individuals are attracted to a certain substance based on its ability to relieve or manage emotions unique to that individual, which they cannot achieve or maintain on their own. Stimulants like cocaine act as antidepressants and perhaps medicating something emotionally they are not paying attention to. Alcohol often acting as an anxiety manager, and one believing it can help them manage better and deal with their anxieties. Opiates often treat emotional pain, often medicating underlying trauma. Marijuana for many to deal with psychosis, for example, lowering the volume of hearing the voices. Addiction, at its most basic level, is an attempt to control and fulfill this desire for inner happiness and is a shortcut in medicating underlying issues. As humans, we only have the capacity to do this for so long. This shortcut and maladaptive coping strategy begins to destroy one's life. The drugs and the alcohol serve as a band-aid to run, numb, and escape, and protect from emotional pain and an inability to cope in a healthy way. Sigmund Freud said it best: unexpressed emotions will never die. They are buried alive and will come up forth in uglier ways. So what do you think we should do? How can we truly help? We need to go deeper and below the surface and see what's really going on. While physical injuries leave scars, mental and emotional pain is invisible to others. What's even more baffling is that most individuals who seek help may not even be consciously aware that they have been using substances to mask underlying issues because it is under or below the surface of consciousness. Their minds have built strategies out of their conscious awareness by means of defense mechanisms to protect them from emotional pain, which is classic denial that helps them soothe and provide them with a temporary escape as a way to provide them with comfort and relief. Some may have moments of clarity during their using that something deeper is going on and know they have been avoiding facing their inner world and have succumbed to the mistaken belief that the external world, or substances in this case, can somehow resolve their issues within them. I have often used the analogy of the little red wagon. Individuals come through those doors seeking help, and with them, they bring their invisible red wagon full of their stuff, their story, and their past. Part of treatment involves helping them sort through it. Many experts, including Dr. Sumrock, a physician, calls addiction ritualized, compulsive comfort seeking. It has now become established that prolonged stress has something to do with the onset of substance use dependency and its deeply ingrained changes in the brain. Statistics continue to evolve and show that approximately 67% of those suffering from addiction also have a history of trauma. It is also believed that the number is underreported, and some speculate it's closer to 86%, and in my experience, I can agree. According to one of the largest studies ever conducted worldwide, called the ACE study for short, and recognized by the World Health Organization on adverse childhood experiences, has shown that considerable and prolonged stress in childhood and adolescence has consequences for a person's health and well-being. It can disrupt early brain development and compromise functioning of the nervous system. So why is this important? Because the maladaptive coping behaviors adopted by some people who have faced such adverse childhood experiences before the age of 18 show that stress can lead to serious problems, such as alcoholism and drug abuse. The ACE study measures 10 items of childhood trauma. This may include household dysfunction, including abuse or neglect, witnessing domestic violence, or substance use or mental illness of a family member, having very inconsistent parents, prolonged bullying, or other items. Primarily, it's due to repeated, consistent, and prolonged stress. As the number of ACE score increases, so does the risk of alcoholism and drug abuse. For instance, if an individual has an ACE score of 4 out of 10, they are 11 times more likely to have used heroin or crack. If 6 or more, they are 46 more times more likely to be an IV drug user. If interested, I encourage you to learn more about these compelling statistics. Results suggest that children with particular adverse childhood experiences may initiate drinking or drug use earlier to cope with problems. The journey of addiction starts when the individual experiences the high and the mood change produced by the substance. Long before anyone suspects that there is a problem with addiction, neurological changes will have taken place deep within the individual. Let me give you an analogy of what this might look like. Imagine you could quantify happiness on a scale out of 100. So someone with a good family life, overall good positive childhood experiences and hobbies that interest them has a 90 out of 100 happiness points. And someone who doesn't have any of these things and is unhappy with themselves has about 20 out of 100 points. When both of these people, for example, shoot the same dose of heroin, it will bring them to 110 over 100. The first guy is like, yeah, that was cool, I guess. But the second guy can't remember the last time he came anywhere close to feeling so much bliss and contentment. And he or she will do anything to get that feeling again. All of us, even those who are not substance users, would experience similar mood changes. But for the addicted, this is new, intense knowledge. In the mood change includes a temporary illusion of control, the illusion of comfort and relief, an illusion of perfection and power, a feeling they may never have otherwise felt before. Therefore, this intoxicating experience is very profound. For the second substance user, this intensity gets mistaken for intimacy, self-esteem, social comfort, or a number of things. These are natural needs all humans need, but are now being provided by a chemical. Through exploration, alongside a counselor or therapist, one can uncover what is really going on. These intoxicating experiences bring knowledge that a relationship With an object, or substance in this case, one's feelings can change and they can find relief, and through these objects they can alter their reality and escape from it. But unfortunately, this is temporary, and an unhealthy attachment forms where one begins attaching to something outside of themselves to fulfill underlying emotional and psychological needs. Consequently, the addictive cycle begins. Once again, the substance becomes reliable, it's consistent, it provides comfort, it is relieving of strong and unmanageable emotions. It becomes an unconscious strategy to protect them from harm or perceived harm, even if it's momentary, just to get out of their bodies, even for a while. Any addictive relationship begins when a person repeatedly seeks the illusion of relief through external objects to avoid unhealthy feelings or situations. This relationship through avoidance is an unhealthy way of taking care of one's emotional needs. Again, the needing of something outside of them to make them feel happy and whole. To the outsider, this emotional logic is irrational, but to the addicted, they have never felt so normal. The cycle causes an emotional craving that results in mental preoccupation. For the individual, the feeling of discomfort becomes a signal to act out, to use a substance, to achieve an altered and desired mood state. This is now a disruption in one's ability to self-emotionally regulate on their own. They become dependent on something like a substance to now emotionally regulate. For example, for the alcoholic, now the signal of stress or overwhelm or unbearable negative feeling of loneliness or anxiety signals and triggers them to want to drink. But the question is, why can't they just stop? You might be asking. We have spoken about the psychological dependence of addiction, though that's not the whole picture. Something else is happening below the surface, long before anyone else suspects or can see from the outside anyways. Physical and biological brain neurochemistry changes begin to take place deep within the individual, exerting a long and powerful influence on the brain that manifests in the craving for the object of addiction. This is substance use dependency. Brain imaging studies have revealed new insights into the mechanisms underlying addiction. The person now becomes hijacked by this part of the addicted mind. Let me clarify. We can use my hand as a representation. This is your brain. Here is your brainstem. There is a place deep within the brain called the limbic system that lives in the downstairs brain, close to the brainstem, and becomes affected and changes with addiction. It's responsible for functions such as emotional reactivity and responsible for such reactive and reflexive responses known as fight, flight, or freeze. When someone has cravings for the substance, a cascade of reactions occurs. So when cravings hit, it short circuits straight to the reward center. So what does this mean? It means that the person only recalls the good times of using and unable to foresee the negative consequences of their past use and what it's caused. Their using may have caused a whole host of serious past consequences, such as DUIs or even overdoses, fights and strains with loved ones, incarceration due to substance-related charges. CAS might now be involved with the children, a loss of job, or even their homes. But somehow, when the craving cycle begins, they cannot make these associations. They get tunnel visioned, become impulsive, only thinking of using or drinking. But the foresight of the potential harm in this addiction doesn't even register or isn't even taken into account. So why does this happen? Now, with revolutionary brain imaging, we are able to see within the brain to explain what is happening. So when someone does become substance dependent, just the thought of using or being internally triggered, even if an outside trigger reminds them of using, something else is happening. The limbic system goes straight to the reward system and bypasses another very important brain structure, the prefrontal cortex, which is right here. It inhibits or prevents the structure from working properly and shutting down of these synaptic pathways in the brain. Brain imaging shows a lack of functioning in this area or shutting off of this essential part called the prefrontal cortex. We can call that the upstairs brain, which is in the forefront of our brains, responsible for executive functioning such as decision-making, planning, foresight. This is where the understanding of future consequences is considered. This is where self-understanding lives. This is where we control our emotions. This is where empathy lives, as well as our morality can be considered. This is where the love for our family and our children lives. This is responsible for putting on the brakes when we consider something to be harmful. So the brakes aren't functioning, so to speak. For simplicity purposes, the person flips their lid, disengages with the upstairs brain. The prefrontal cortex is now offline and not functioning as it's meant to function. The person becomes hijacked, and that part of the mind that rules addiction is now in control, and the system goes rogue. There is a loss of perspective, and they are only living for the moment. Hence why we often say the person becomes powerless over their addiction, and their life has become unmanageable. Something else is now in the driver's seat. The person suffering from addiction does really love his family and children, for instance, but something else has taken over. So when they are in that addictive cycle, they too are baffled to why they can't just stop. This in turn induces more shame and makes the individual feel even more worse, which only exasperates their using. Remember, the feeling of discomfort only serves to cue more numbing? Something else is happening behind the scenes that helps to explain the powerful control of this condition of addiction. I'm sure you've all heard about the neurotransmitter dopamine as playing a major role in addiction. Let's explore this right now. So dopamine is a chemical messenger for the biological purpose to encourage life-sustaining behaviors. In other words, it helps us survive. Let me ask you a question. What do we need to survive? Well, you need food, water to reproduce. We need safety, which includes taking care of our young, for example, to be able to sustain life and future generations. Dopamine is secreted and produces a pleasurable sensation when these necessary behaviors happen to encourage it happens again. So when we engage in life-sustaining behaviors such as eating food, drinking water, for example, dopamine is secreted as a pleasurable sensation to encourage us to do it again. Because without them, we would otherwise die. The brain creates a hierarchy or an order based on dopamine released. First, food, water, safety, in that sort of order. To simplify, dopamine's job is to send the message, do that again, because it's necessary for survival, thus creating a learning memory pattern, triggering us to stay on the right path in life and the path of survival and well-being. Another thing dopamine does is it makes people focus on things outside of themselves. And when we have dopamine in our system, we tend to be outward facing and in the pursuit of things in our environment. It's the go after it molecule. Alcohol and other mood altering drugs, however, artificially create this effect and do so much more intensely than any other natural rewards, flooding the system with an unnatural amount of dopamine up to 10 times more than natural rewards such as food. Then it's no wonder why people will forego food for days, choosing drugs over alcohol instead. Drugs of abuse such as methamphetamine, opiates, alcohol, cocaine, amongst others, secrete massive amounts of dopamine in the brain. It's the reward center. And as a result, they feel high. The problem now is that the hierarchy changes with repetitive use. The drugs and alcohol take over the number one slot. That is, even before food, water, safety for self, and even you're young for that matter. The amount of dopamine determines what is most important. Now, doesn't it make sense that the individual who is addicted will put their drugs and alcohol first ahead of everything else? They knew they needed money for rent or food, or had to buy clothes for the kids, but the drugs come first, even ahead of their own family and everything else. Let me get my fix, and then I'll take care of everything else later. And that's why nothing seems as interesting or as attractive than the substance. It's all they can think about. When I ask clients what they value, what's most important to them, what they can't imagine living without, their typical response is my family, love, my morals, my career. Unfortunately, they realize through exploration that this is not how they've been living their lives. Their values and their priorities are not in line with their behaviors, and that there is another part or program running the show. Unfortunately, people often get stuck in the rut of thinking things aren't ever going to change. Now, you might be thinking, now what? Are we, those substance dependent, doomed forever and unable to take back control over our lives? Are they cursed forever? The answer, fortunately, is no. One can be helped. First, by considering the whole entire person. And coming from this approach, it empowers the individual to get the help they really require. And by taking this approach, the client can feel more empowered, less shamed, and come to understand that there isn't something inherently or chronically wrong with them, that they can do this. With what we have come to know and with treatment, the person can begin the journey of healing and take back control over their lives. The individual can change and be the person they want to be, and we're always meant to be. We know the brain can change too, and it's not fixed. This is known as neuroplasticity. So, what does recovery look like? How do we create this neuroplasticity and new way of being? You continue learning. In active recovery and in treatment, one can hit the pause button and reevaluate their lives with the aid of people to help them along the way. In the recovery process, the individual will go through stages of change, and this can take some time. In a good recovery program, one will learn new ways of thinking, new strategies to move them through these stages. This is what recovery might look like. The first thing you are attracted to, such the substance, becomes a repellent. And again, this happens in stages and can take some time. This is ruining my life, it's ruining my marriage, this is getting me in all kinds of trouble, I'm starting to hate this, I'm doing it every day, I'm sick of this, it's stupid, it's disgusting, I want to stop, I want to be free of it. This is the contemplation stage. So if this sounds like you, then you may actually be in the process of change and you may not even know it. And it's a normal and natural stage that precedes making the decision to take action. That might look like calling in for an assessment or gathering more information about what treatment might look like. And if you are choosing to watch this video, then I'm confident and convinced that you are in the contemplation stage and taking action and closer to making a decision towards changing your substance use and wanting to get help. So good for you. So we start seeing neuroplasticity happening when we have a new desire, a desire to move in another direction. You have less desire over there. And those scales rebalance. You start learning new methods for self-control that you haven't used for a long time or have never learned at all. It's synaptic wiring. As we learn new skills and methods of self-regulation, we see behavioral and neurological changes. As neurons fire together, they wire together. We learn new behaviors to abstain. So it's a learned behavior. People who overcome their addictions are moving towards their developing new skills and new ways of understanding themselves and new perspectives. Some people may even say, I'm glad I went through this period of suffering, and see recovery as an opportunity, saying, I'm glad I went through this. I'm a deeper, fuller person for it, and have a greater understanding of myself. I know my limits. I know where I want to go and who I want to be. Seeing it as further development and growth, going back to empowering the individual. So whether the underlying cause of your dependency are unresolved events from the past or an inability to cope with current conditions, including emotional dysregulation or a neurochemical imbalance or a combination of these, know this. Not only are the causes of dependency within you, but all the solutions are too. So I'm hoping that you can see that by surrendering to healing, to the underlying conditions that fuel dependency in the first place, one can learn to navigate this. And you don't have to do this alone. Remember, you cannot distract or run from yourself forever. No matter where you go, you're always there. No matter what you do to avoid being with yourself, you'll always come back around to having to face you again. You need to get down to the core and do some inner work and inner exploration with the help of your counselor or therapist. The solutions are not outside of us, so going inward, that's the real work. People need to get help to become more aware of themselves, their past, where they came from, understand how they got this way, so they can have a future they can care about, and move towards a future they intentionally and purposefully choose. Thank you.